Hello guys, welcome to my channel. I am Oroth and I'm delighted to share with you my first longer video. And today we're gonna talk about damage in Diablo Immortal and more specific PvE damage. So the goal with this video is to give you a tutorial, a detailed tutorial about how to maximize everything that affects your PvE damage. I don't only want to give you the information about my current build, I also want to try to educate you about how different tweaks will affect your total damage output, so that you in the future maybe can make more informed decisions about what items to equip, what gems to equip, etc. And before we start, I would also like to tell you that everything in this video is actually based on my own testing and my own research. So of course there might be a few details that are not correct or a little bit off, but I still think that in the broad picture it will give you a lot of understanding about how damage works. So let's move on. So let's first go through the timeline of this video about every section that we will talk about. And the first section will be base damage, where we will go through how your base damage that you can see on your attribute screen is calculated. After that, we will talk about different types of damage modifiers. And in Diablo Immortal, there are actually 4 different kinds of damage modifiers. So we will talk about these 4 types, and I have divided them into 4 brackets. And the first bracket is normal damage modifiers. The second bracket is legendary gem modifiers. The third bracket is buffs and debuffs. And finally, the fourth bracket is based on combat rating. After we have gone through these 4 brackets, we're going to talk about critical hits. And first, I'm going to explain to you how critical hit damage works and how you can increase that number as much as possible. And after that, we will also talk about critical hit chance and how you can increase that number as much as possible. When we've done so, we will do some calculations based on my current build, but it's important to remember that everything in this video is actually useful for any class. So it doesn't matter if you are a necromancer like me, or if you are a demon hunter, a blood knight, a barbarian, or a crusader, a wizard, or whichever class you want to play. So this is useful for everybody. When we have done these calculations, I will also mention some other important factors that you can keep in mind when tweaking your builds to optimize it as much as possible. And finally, we will also go through some key takeaways, some bits that you can't forget, that you have to bring with you after watching this. So let's move on to base damage. The base damage is actually the number you can see if you go to your attribute screen. So as you can see here on this picture, I have highlighted for you on the top there the damage of my current build, the base damage that is. I know that a majority of players, they actually tend to look on this number when they evaluate which build is the strongest. And as a result of that, I can also see a lot of players that tries to maximize their resonance as much as possible. Because resonance is a good way to increase your base damage. But actually, it's not a good way to increase your total damage output. And you will understand this after you have watched this video. So hopefully, when we are done here today, you will try to think differently. And there are several factors though that adds up to this base damage, and I still think it's important that we go through them so that you understand the logic behind how it's calculated. And the first factor is item-based damage. The item-based damage is the number you can see when you inspect an item. I have highlighted it here for you, and this is the number you will see when you have no gems equipped, so when your resonance is 0. So if you take all of the items that has base damage on them, it's the helmet, it's the shoulders, it's the main hands, it's the off hands, and it's the gloves. If you unequip all your gems, so you have 0 resonance, you can go and spectate your items and you will see the base damage number. The base damage number will actually be the same on every item dropped in one specific difficulty, but they will increase over time as you progress to the next hell level or to the next inferno level. So if you find a helmet in Inferno 1, it will have a lower base damage compared to a helmet in Inferno 2. The next thing we have to look at when we're going to calculate our base damage is our resonance. And the resonance does one thing and one thing only, and that is that it increases the base damage on your items that we just explained. So 20 resonance equals 1% increase. So let's say that you have a helmet with 100 base damage, and then you equip a legendary gem which gives you 20 resonance. It will add 1% base damage to that item. So instead of 100 damage, it will be 101 damage. The next thing that affects your base damage is the total number on the ranks of the gems that are socketed in your glove. And just to make it easier for you, I have made a print screen here of my gloves. You can see that I have 2 gems equipped. They are both rank 8, so that's a total of 16 ranks. Each rank will increase the base damage of the glove by 3%. So in this case, it's a total of 48% increase. The next thing that affects your base damage is tourmalines. Tourmalines can be put inside a red socket, and you can have red socket on your neck, on your rings, and on your waist. Your neck always has one red socket spot. The rings can have one socket only, and it can sometimes be red, it can sometimes be blue, and it can sometimes be yellow. And on the waist, you either have 2 sockets or 3 sockets. As you can see here on my waist, I have 3 sockets, and I have put 3 tourmalines in them. And the number you can see here, the bonus, goes straight into the base damage on the attribute screen. The next thing that affects base damage is the bonus that you get from your Paragon. If you go to your Paragon page, you can see a book on the left side of your screen. And if you click on that book, it will open this what you can see now, where you can see all the attribute bonuses that you get from the points that you put in the different trees. On my character, I currently have 4,700 damage increase from this effect. And I recommend everyone to put as much damage as possible and maximize every tree when it comes to damage. I would also recommend to maximize armor penetration, which you can see here. And we will talk more about the effect of armor penetration later on in this video. The next thing that affects your base damage is the legacy of the Horadrim. On my character at the moment, I have 300 damage increase from this. And next we have either intelligence or strength that has an effect on your base damage. If you're an intelligence based character, it will be intelligence, and if you're a strength based character, it will be strength. And I, as a necromancer, I'm in intelligence based class, and therefore we look at intelligence. And currently I have 7,591 intelligence, and each point will give me 0.3 damage. So if I would multiply 7,591 times 0.3, I get the actual base damage that gets added to the damage on my attribute screen. So to summarize, at the bottom here you can see a formula that you can use. So if you take your total item base damage and you multiply it by 1 plus your resonance divided by 2000, and then you add each rank on your socketed gems. So in my case it was 2 rank 8 gems, so that's 16. So I would take 16, multiply it by the base damage of the gloves, and then multiply it by 3%. And after that I add the bonuses from Tourmalines, from the Paragon bonuses, from the Legacy of the Horadrim, and finally the bonuses from Intelligence or Strength. And this, if I do this correctly, it will add up to the same number that I see on the attribute screen. Important to note here though is that there is actually another minor factor that it can affect your base damage. And there is a magical attribute that you can roll on an item that says item base damage increased by X%. Me, for example, I have an offhand with a base item damage of 399, and I also have the magical attribute item base damage increased by 3%. So then I actually have to add 3% of 399, which is roughly 12 damage to my base damage, and then it's going to be, the calculation is going to be correct. So that is basically how you understand base damage and what it consists of. So let's move on and talk about the different damage modifiers in Diablo Immortal. So, as I've explained, there are a lot of different damage modifiers in Diablo Immortal, and they're actually divided into 4 different brackets. And the first bracket I call normal damage modifiers. And now we're going to talk about what type of modifiers that are included in this bracket. So first we have magical attributes. This can, for example, be, as you can see here on my gloves, damage done by your summons increased by 10%. But there are also a lot of other magical attributes like skill damage or primary attack damage. And what you have to do is that you have to think which magical attributes that are actually relevant for your type of build. So for me, as a necromancer, I use summons, so therefore I can include these 10% in this bracket. But if you are, for example, a blood knight, you don't include this type of magical attribute in this bracket. So if you find a ring as a blood knight that has 10% increased damage on your summons, it basically does nothing, right? So then you should not add it when you calculate your total damage output. Important also to note here is that you can actually get, for example, primary attack damage also from gem resonance. That means that when you have an awakened gem, a rank 10 gem, and you awaken it, you can add extra gem resonance and unlock different bonus effects. These bonus effects, they are not included in this bracket, but a different bracket that we will go through later in this video. The next thing that affects this bracket is bonuses from your set. So just to highlight an example, you can see here I use the Shepherd set, and if I equip at least 2 pieces, I will get 15% increased damage on my summons. And this I will of course include in this bracket since I use summons. If you are not a summoner, you should not use this set, you should use some other set that gives you a damage bonus that is relevant for your build. Then we have Essence Mastery. Essence Mastery is something that you can level up to a maximum of level 4. So when you play a fresh class, your Essence Mastery will be at 0. But as you find more and more legendary items and you extract them at the Essence transfer, you will actually level up your Essence Mastery over time. And some of the Essence Mastery bonuses gives a damage effect. And here is an example, as you can see here on the screen. I have Essence Mastery level 4, and when I use Coals for Ice as a helmet essence, the Essence Mastery will increase the damage of my command skeletons by 18%. So this number would also go into my normal damage modifier bracket. Next, we have the charm. So every bonus effect that you have on your charm is also included in the normal damage modifier bracket. The next thing that we can look at is warband bonuses. So by using the correct remnant sets and also have the correct roll in your warband, you can increase your damage even further. And all of these increases, they go into bracket 1. And first of all, if you have the attacker roll, there's a choice to get a damage bonus of 3.5%, as you can see here. There are also 2 yellow remnants that you can find that increases your damage. You have Typhorus that increases your damage by 6%, and Color Brutus that increases your damage by up to 10%. You also have a blue remnant called Coward's Rage that can increase your damage by 3%. And lastly, you have a common remnant called the Hand Axe of Anger that can increase your primary attack damage increased by 1.5%. And if you have the Hand Axe of Anger active, you have to think, is this relevant for my build? If the answer is yes, then I should include these 1.5% in bracket 1 when I calculate my total damage output. So if your build is primary attack based, then you should include it. But also, the damage of most of my summons actually also scale with primary attack damage. So therefore I will also include it in my calculations. The next thing that affects this bracket is bonuses from your Paragon, and more specifically the bonuses from your active Paragon tree. So for example, if you have the Weaver Paragon active, you can get an up to 15% damage increase. This 15% will also go into bracket 1. Then we also have awakened items. An awakened item is possible if you have rank 10 legendary gem equipped in that slot. So for example, here on my helmet, I have a rank 10 legendary gem and I have awakened it. And when you awaken an item, you will get different types of bonuses. And sometimes that bonus will be a damage increase of some kind. And as you can see here, since I awakened my helmet, it will give a 10% damage increase to command skeletons. And this is also included in the first bracket. You also have certain item effects from the essence that you choose. So in this case, as an example, I have chosen to show you one of my offense. And this essence actually buffs the damage of my golem for each harmful effect that is on the enemy. This number also goes into normal damage modifiers. Another very important thing that affects the first bracket is your reforge. And here you can actually do a lot of different tweaks. But you have to think very carefully about what to invest in. Because some of the reforges, they work for some builds, but not for other builds. If you can look here on my helmet, for example, you can see my current reforge setup. You can see that I use damage done by your summons, damage to demons, critical hit damage, damage done to enemies below 30%, and primary attack damage. Actually, damage to demons and damage done to enemies below 30% does not scale with the summon damage. So therefore I do not include it in the bracket when I calculate my own damage. But I still want to keep these reforges because they're very strong if I would change class. For example, damage to demons is very, very strong, since if you do gauntlet runs, for example, every boss is a demon. So if I ever change to Blood Knight, for example, I want to keep these reforges to maximize the Blood Knight damage. So also one more thing to say about reforge. Into this bracket, I would therefore put damage done by your summons increased and the primary attack damage, since it also scales with the damage of my summons. Critical hit damage though, that's not in one of the brackets. We will talk about critical hit damage later in this video, so don't include critical hit damage. Another thing that is added into this bracket is the invocation. So if you have invocation on any of your gears, when it activates, it will trigger a special bonus effect. And one of those bonus effects are that it increases your damage by 15% for 6 seconds. And this 15% also goes into normal damage modifiers, into bracket 1. So to summarize, here is everything that we've been going through so far. And like I said earlier, when you're gonna make a new build or when you want to make tweaks to your current build, make sure that every magical attribute, every set bonus, every essence mastery is as relevant as possible. Because the key to achieve very high DPS in Diablo Immortal is to maximize each bracket. And this will be very clear later in this video when we start making the calculations. So that's it for bracket 1, and let's move on to bracket 2. So let us continue and talk about bracket 2, which is legendary gem modifiers. And legendary gem modifiers, it's damage bonus effects that you get from legendary gems. So let's show a few examples based on my current build. First, I use a Blood-Soaked Jade. It's at rank 8, and at rank 8 it will give me a damage bonus of 20.5%. So this 20.5% goes into bracket 2. The next gem that I use is Bottled Hope, and Bottled Hope will give an effect to the whole party that increases the damage done by 20.5%. And this also goes into bracket 2. Actually, as a necromancer and using the Bottled Hope, you can get double the effect, because if you manage to buff both yourself and your summons at the same time, the summons, they scale with your own damage. So your own damage is buffed, which will increase the damage of the summons, but then the summons are also buffed, so it will increase the damage again. So Bottled Hope is extremely strong for necromancers, for any class really. So keep this in mind when you make your build. And if there are any 5-star gems that you should aim for, it's Bottled Hope and Blood-Soaked Jade. I also have to mention another gem here, which is very important for necromancers, and that is Echoing Shade. Echoing Shade actually doesn't give any damage modifiers, but it gives me more summons. And since all of my build is based on increasing the damage of summons, each summon from each clone from the Echoing Shade will be extremely strong and do a lot of DPS by themselves. So this is just something to mention for necromancers out there. I also use Pain Clasp. Pain Clasp increases my damage done by 24% whenever the enemy is suffering from a continuous damage effect. And the good thing is that I use the Poison Golem, so the Poison Golem will always activate Pain Clasp. But actually Pain Clasp also gets activated from other people's continual damage effects as well. So if you don't have a way to activate it yourself, whenever you play dungeons or doing raids, it will almost always be active all the time because someone else will apply a continual damage effect on the enemy. Next, I also use Bloody Reach. Bloody Reach increases the damage done the further away I stand from the target. And since I'm a Necromancer, a ranged class, this gem is very strong for me. The good thing for Necromancer is that it doesn't matter if your summons are close to the enemy. The damage effect actually is dependent on how far you are standing from the enemy. So this is a very strong gem for any ranged class, not so strong for any melee class, of course. Lastly, I also use Follower's Burden. It's the last gem that gives a damage modifier, and it gives up to 18% extra damage based on how many summons I control. And if you have ever played Necromancer, you will understand that this will always be at maximum level. So it's a very good gem for Necromancers only. Important to tell you as well before we move on from the legendary gems is that you don't have to upgrade them to rank 10 for them to be very, very strong. It's actually enough if you get them to rank 5 or rank 6. So it's not necessary to get them to rank 10. It will always be better to switch out your 5-star gems that has no damage modifiers and put in a 2-star gem with a damage modifier. Even if your base damage goes down on your attribute page, your real damage output will still go up. And you will understand this even more when we start doing the calculations in a little bit. Lastly, what also affects this bracket is the gem resonance effects, like I mentioned earlier. If you have a rank 10 gem, like here I show an example, I have a Bloody Reach at rank 10. I have also fully upgraded the gem resonance inside that gem, and it gives me some extra bonuses like primary attack damage increased, which works with my summons, so that's very good. Skill damage, it works with the golem in some cases, but for most part it doesn't really affect the damage output, so therefore I don't include this 2% in the bracket 2. But this last one, damage done increased by 1% per party member, this number I of course include, because whenever I'm in a party it will increase the damage, it will increase the strength of this bracket. Remember that the gems I showed you now, they are the gems I use for my summoner build. There are also other gems that affects the damage, but yeah, it depends on what class you're playing. For example, if you're a melee class, you can switch out Bloody Reach and Follower's Burden. You can put in Fervent Fang. Fervent Fang is a very strong gem. The problem for me is that it only affects my own damage, but it doesn't affect the summons for some reason. I don't know if this is intended or if it's a bug, but that's how it is right now. So key takeaway, don't focus on 5-star gems. A lot of players out there, when I spectate them, they only equip 5-star gems. And they upgrade them to like rank 2 or rank 3. And I think they do this because this way they increase the resonance as much as possible. And they see that, wow, my base damage is higher now. But this is totally wrong to do it like this. Because if you do it like that, you will actually kill off bracket 2 entirely. And the key to get very high damage output in Diablo Immortal is to maximize all of the 4 brackets as much as possible. So that's everything to say about bracket 2. So let's move on and talk about bracket 3, which is buffs and debuffs. I'm going to give you a few examples of both buffs and debuffs, and then I'm going to explain you how it actually works. So one example, as I as a Necromancer can use, is the new Bone Wall Essence. That's the new chest piece that just released with the latest patch. And this actually gives the Necromancer a buff that buffs you by 40%, so it's a very strong buff. We also already have the Poison Golem, and as you can see here, it adds a debuff to the enemy at 10%, which means that the enemy will take more damage. And there are actually a lot of buffs and debuffs for each class. And important to note here is that you can't have several buffs active at the same time, or several debuffs targeting the enemy at the same time. So let's say, for example, that you have a barbarian and a monk on your team, and they both have a damage buff. The barbarian buff gives 20% increased damage, I think, at least at base value, and the monk buff will give you 30%. If both of these buffs are active at the same time, you will actually only get the bonus effect from the monk buff, because that's the strongest one. So keep this in mind when you are trying to compose a party to head into the dungeons for speedruns, or even more important, if you're going to do raids or gauntlet. If you really want to do as fast runs as possible, you have to pay attention to these details. So either you form a party that doesn't have overlapping buffs or debuffs whatsoever, or if you are really into it, you can have different damage buffs, but you have to cycle them correctly as you progress through the dungeon or through the raid and whatsoever. So this is very important. And yeah, that's basically, if you add the highest buff and you add the highest debuff, that's the total percentage that goes into the third bracket, buffs and debuffs. So now we have finally reached the final bracket, and that bracket has to do with combat rating. And actually, it's not that complicated. The only thing that affects this bracket is your combat rating. So if you go to your character's attribute screen, you can find your combat rating. And if you click on it, you can actually see the current bonus effects that you get from it. And what's very important to note here is that the damage bonus that you can get from combat rating is actually capped at 11.3%. So this means that as long as you have reached this cap, it doesn't matter if you improve your combat rating further. And this is also a very common mistake that I see a lot of players do, that whenever they find a new item, they look on the arrows, and if it's green pointing up, they will equip it. And most often they tend to focus mostly on the combat rating. And this is totally wrong. So the effect of this is that there are players out there that every day finds amazing items, but it has a little bit lower combat rating. So they go to the blacksmith and salvage it. And hopefully, those of you who watch this video, if you have done this before, you will not do this again, because you will understand exactly what to look for when you find a new item. The only reason when it's actually viable to equip something with more combat rating, when we talk about PvE content, is if you're gonna do challenge rifts that are way above your if you're way below the recommended combat rating of a challenge rift, or if you're gonna do a raid or gauntlet where you're below the recommended. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if you increase your combat rating by 10,000. The damage increase that you get from it will still be 11.3%. So you have to focus on other factors. So this is the fourth bracket, but you can't really work with it a lot. Just make sure to have it capped, and that's it. Yeah, and I can also mention before we move on that in many cases I actually use older items. When I was in Inferno 1, I had the helmet from Hell 7 because I was not able to find a helmet that would increase my damage output more. And with my current build, I have several items from Inferno 1 because even if I switch it out and increase my combat rating or my base damage, it's the magical attributes on the items that are wrong, so therefore it makes no sense to switch them out. And yeah, when we do the calculations in a bit, you will see it more clearly exactly what to look for. So now, when we are done talking about the different types of damage modifiers, we will start to talk about critical hits. And critical hits can either be affected by critical hit damage or critical hit chance. So first we're going to talk about critical hit damage, what it means, how it works, and how you can improve it as much as possible. The base value of critical hit damage is always 100%. This means that if a normal hit will do 10k damage, if you make a critical hit with 100% critical hit damage, it will make double damage, 20k. But actually there's many ways to increase this number further, and that is very important to improve your total damage output. So the first thing you can do is that you can tweak your reforge. So as I showed you before, one of the reforges that I use is critical hit damage increased by 3%, and that's the maximum you can get on one reforge. And if you get this on all 8 slots, you will actually have 24% more critical hit damage. It's very important. And the next thing you can do to improve your critical hit damage is by looking at your magical attributes. And you can actually roll critical hit damage on your helmet, your shoulders, your main hands, and your offhands. Important to note here though is that you should always prioritize critical hit chance over critical hit damage. So you will understand soon why, because I'm going to explain that in the next section. The maximum roll you can get on critical hit damage is 7.5% if it's an item with only one magical attribute. But since critical hit chance is so important, you should never go for this option. Actually, you should always have critical hit chance in the slots where it's possible. An item with only critical hit chance is a lot better than a triple stat item with 3 different kinds of magical attributes that are not critical hit chance. So always remember this. But the best items, they actually have both critical hit chance and critical hit damage. And for this to happen, the item has to have at least 3 normal attributes on it. So if you ever find an exceptional item with only 2 normal attributes, you can't have both critical hit chance and critical hit damage on that item. Also important to note here is that if you get a maximum roll on the critical hit chance, which is 4% on an exceptional item, you can't have a maximum roll on the critical hit damage. And since critical hit chance is a little bit more important than critical hit damage, the best type of item that you can find is the item that has the highest roll on critical hit chance and the second highest roll on critical hit damage, which gives us 4% critical hit chance and 4.5% critical hit damage. So if you have managed to optimize your build, you will actually have 6 items with this combination, and that will give you 4.5% times 6, so an extra 27% critical hit damage. The next thing that affects your critical hit damage is armor penetration. And there are several ways to improve your armor penetration. And the maximum critical hit damage bonus you can get from armor penetration is 57%. And it works like this, that each difficulty level, so for example Inferno 1 or Inferno 2, has a recommended armor penetration level. And as long as your armor penetration is above this, you will gain a critical hit damage bonus that can go up to 57%. And the closer you are to the maximum bonus, the more armor penetration you need to increase it. So it's fairly easy, as long as you are above the recommended level, to reach a critical hit damage of 30, 40, or maybe even 50%. So let's talk about how you can improve your armor penetration. First of all, you get a bonus from the Legacy of the Horadrim, and as you can see here, I currently get 711 points from the Horadrim. You can also get armor penetration from your Paragon points that you have put in the different trees. And if you go to the Paragon page, you can find your total attribute bonuses there. And here you can see that I get a total of 700 points in armor penetration. And as I said earlier in this video, you should always, when doing PvE content and if you want to maximize your damage output, put as many points as possible in damage and armor penetration. And if you have managed to unlock all the current Paragon trees, this is the maximum that you can get from the Paragon that you see here on the screen. Another way to improve your armor penetration is to increase your fortitude. Every point in fortitude gives 0.1 armor penetration. So as you can see here, I have a total of 5,472 fortitude, and this gives me roughly 547 armor penetration. I can increase the fortitude by equipping items that has fortitude on it, but I can also get it from the ancestral weapon tableau in my warband, or from demonic remains after doing raids. So keep that in mind. Lastly, we have Sapphires, which is a normal gem that you put into a blue socket. You can get a blue socket on your necklace if it has 3 sockets. You can also have either a yellow, red, or a blue socket on a ring, which only has 1 socket. And then you can also get blue sockets on your feet, either 2 or 3 sockets. So those are the ways you can increase armor penetration. There is also one final way to increase critical hit damage, and that is through a warband remnant called Manifest Carnage. So if you have the attacker role, there is actually a yellow remnant, one of the rare ones, that has the following effect. It will increase your critical hit damage by 10%, while your critical hit chance is greater than 70%. So, of course, if you're affected by a Crusader banner, your critical hit chance will be at 100%, which will activate Manifest Carnage. But it's also possible to bump up your critical hit chance that much so that it activates Manifest Carnage. And we will talk about critical hit chance in the next segment of this video. But before we talk about critical hit chance, I just want to show you what my build gives me when it comes to critical hit damage. As you can see, I have really optimized almost perfectly the critical hit damage on my character. I get 53% critical hit damage from armor penetration. The maximum is 57%. I get 22.5% from magical attributes. And as I told you before, the optimal build when it comes to critical hit chance and critical hit damage will give you 27% extra critical hit damage. I also get 23% from the Reforge. The maximum is 24%, so it's almost maxed. And lastly, I use Manifest Carnage. And as you will see soon, this remnant is actually most of the time active when I fight. So that gives me an extra 10%. And if we add all of those together with the base critical hit damage, my actual critical hit damage is 208.5, which means that if I would hit 10k on a normal hit, I would hit more than 3 times harder with a critical hit. So yeah, it's a huge difference. Imagine instead of 10k, we are over 30k each hit. But then we come to the next thing, critical hit chance. Because if I hit 3 times harder each time I critical hit, I really want to critical hit a lot, right? So yeah, before moving on to critical hit chance, here's a summary of what affects critical hit damage. And important to note here is that you can actually also improve your critical hit damage from the demonic remains, because they also have magical attributes. Demonic remains are the loot that you get when you do raids with your warband. But important to remember here is that these magical attributes, they're only effective and working at all when you are either doing challenge rifts or raids or gauntlet. But me personally, I really like to do speed runs in gauntlet, and therefore you also have to optimize your demonic remains, because currently, for example, I have 19% extra critical hit chance, I have a lot of extra summon damage, and I also have some critical hit damage. So that makes me even stronger when I do raids or gauntlet. So keep that in mind. But let's move on to critical hit chance. Like we just said, thanks to my very high critical hit damage, each critical hit hits more than 3 times harder. But the problem is that the base value of critical hit chance is only 3%. So if I don't work with the critical hit chance at all, 3% of the time I will do 3 times as much damage. But of course you can imagine, if there are some ways to improve this number, it will greatly affect my total damage output. And that's exactly what we're going to look at now. So first of all, just like with critical hit damage, we already talked about it, you can increase your critical hit chance through magical attributes. The maximum roll you can get on an item is 5% critical hit chance, but you can only get 5% if the item only has 1 magical attribute. If you compare it with the 7.5% critical hit damage that you can get if it's only 1 magical attribute, the 5% critical hit chance is actually viable and will be a great improvement for your build in most cases. So if you have an item that don't have any critical hit chance and you find a non-exceptional item with critical hit chance at 5%, of course it's a very strong item, you should equip it. I can imagine that most of you up until now, whenever you find an item that is non-exceptional, you actually salvage it. But remember this now, critical hit chance is crucial to improve your damage. It's the same with critical hit chance. You can roll it on the helmet, on the shoulders, on the main hands and on the off hands. And like I said, always prioritize critical hit chance over critical hit damage. Like I said in the previous segment, the best roll that you can get on an item is when it has both critical hit chance and critical hit damage. And like I said, it was 4% critical hit chance and 4.5% critical hit damage. So if you manage to optimize your build and find this combination on all 6 slots that can have both critical hit chance and critical hit damage, you will increase your critical hit chance by 24%. So we started with 3% and now we add 24%. The next thing you can do to increase your critical hit chance is to equip a set that corresponds with your build, because some sets actually increases the critical hit chance. As a summoner necromancer, I use the shepherd and beastmaster set, because as you can see here, if I have 4 pieces equipped, it actually increases my hit chance, my critical hit chance by 3% for each of my active summons. And if you've ever played Necromancer, you know that this effect will be at maximum almost all the time. So that's an 18% increase. There are also some legendary gems that increases critical hit chance. To mention two of them, first we have Mother's Lament. At rank 10 it will increase your critical hit chance by 32% for 6 seconds. And that's a lot. And if you think about it, most fights actually are over in 6 seconds, at least if you're in a strong group. For me personally, when I do raids with my warband, we always finish each boss within 6 seconds. And if the boss is not dead, we finish a whole phase within 6 seconds. So if you think about it that way, if you look on it first, it looks like, okay, it's up 6 seconds and then it's down 14 seconds. But most of the time in Diablo Immortal, you engage in a fight and then it's over fairly quickly, and then you have to move to the next boss, or you have to wait for an animation to finish. And it's very often that the next time when you actually need the buff, it's going to activate again, because it activates every 20 seconds. So I would say that this is up maybe 75-80% of the time. 80% of the fighting is with Mother's Lament active. There are also other gems that affects critical hit chance. For example, a rank 10 Berserker's Eye gives a passive critical hit chance buff of 2%, so it's always there. Berserker's Eye is therefore a very viable option, because it both gives a damage modifier to the second bracket, like we talked about, and it also increases the critical hit chance a little bit. There's also another very strong gem called Cutthroat's Grin, which increases your critical hit chance as long as you are fighting behind the enemy. And basically you don't have to stand straight behind it. If you imagine a circle like this and the boss is facing this way, you just have to stand behind somewhere here in this area. The problem for a Necromancer is that when I stand behind the boss, it actually only increases the chance for a primary attack of my own to be a critical hit, but it doesn't increase the critical hit chance of the summons. So therefore this is not a viable option for a Necromancer, but for other classes it's a very, very strong gem, because critical hit chance is so important. So if you really want to maximize and you're not a Necromancer, I would recommend you to put in the Cutthroat's Grin in your build. You can also increase your critical hit chance from certain Paragon trees, and you will get the bonus effect if that Paragon tree is active. So here's an example. You can get 6.5% critical hit chance if you have the Weaver Paragon tree. You can also get 10% critical hit chance from Mastermind Paragon tree, but I actually prefer the Weaver tree because it also gives this damage bonus of 15%. And if you're going in a party, I would recommend the highest DPS dealers to use Weaver, and if it's possible you can make 4 different classes in the party, and one of the supporters can use Mastermind in order to put a debuff on the boss fight, because that's one of the effects from the Mastermind tree. But anyways, there are also some Warband remnants that affects your critical hit chance. You have the War Vase, which is a blue remnant. It increases your critical hit chance by 3% while your total health is above 70%. You have Liar's Pact, which increases critical hit chance by 3% while attacking from behind. And also you have Arrowhead of Precision that increases your critical hit chance by 1%. To be honest, I'm not sure if Liar's Pact or War Vase actually works with my summons. I would guess that at least Liar's Pact does not work with summons, since Cutthroat's Grin with the same effect doesn't work with summons, but I have not been able to confirm this. But for any other class, these remnants are very, very strong. So if you go into your warband and you go to manage remnants, you can see which remnant set that is active in your warband. And if you see that, okay, I want to be an attacker, but the set is not that good, there's many of the remnants mentioned in this video that are not present, then you should really talk with your members in the warband and go out and purge together to find a better set, because that will have a huge impact, especially since we talk about critical hit chance here. So you remember now that we started with a base of 3%, and now I'm going to show you what my critical hit chance looks like. The maximum I could get from magical attributes was 24%, and I'm currently at 22%. I get 18% from the Shepherd set, I get 32% from Mother's Lament, and I get 6.5% from the Weaver, plus the 3% that is the base. So as a matter of fact, I have 82% critical hit chance almost all of the time. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a warband remnant called Manifest Carnage, which increases my critical hit damage by 10% whenever my critical hit chance is above 70%. And this means that with my current build, I actually activate this remnant without the help of a Crusader. So that will lead to massive damage output. So to summarize, we've been going through the different factors that increases your critical hit chance. And if there's one of the things that you really should focus on that's easy to fix, is to look on the critical hit chance. Because when I spectate a lot of characters, I see that they have legendary items with 3 stats, and they have it looks really good if you just don't understand how damage works exactly, but it doesn't have critical hit chance. So if you have an item that can have critical hit chance and it doesn't have it now, you should swap it out for the first item you find with critical hit chance. And here's once again something that you really have to remember, because I can imagine that a lot of you have found a lot of great gear that is actually perfect, but it has not as much combat rating, and it doesn't have 3 magical attributes perhaps and a lower score, and therefore you salvaged it. And actually it's very rare to find the combination of both critical hit chance and critical hit damage, and if you manage to find it, you might keep it for several difficulty levels. For example, when I was in Inferno 1, I still had a helmet from Hell 7 that was 300 paragons old. So yeah, I didn't manage to find a better item. So please be very careful when you salvage something, so you don't destroy something useful, okay? So, and now we have finally gone through all the explanation needed to start make some calculations. We will, in the end of this video, go through a few more factors that affects damage, but first we need to do these calculations to explain those easier. And what we're going to do now is that I'm actually going to show you exactly the composition of the different brackets on my character. So we're going to see in every detail how my build looks at, what my build looks like, I mean. And with this build, I've been able to juice out 68 million damage in 10 seconds at the training dummy. And what's also good is that if I just switch out some essences, I can also keep a lot of sustained damage. And this is with the build using 4300 resonance. So let's calculate together and go through it step by step. And you can also apply this to your character if you just follow the same steps as we do now. Hopefully this can enable you to compare 2 items that looks almost the same, but if you do these calculations you can actually see exactly which one is the best when it comes to damage output. So without further ado, let us continue. And first we're gonna look at the base damage. Here you can see a spreadsheet where I filled in the data on my character. So you can see here in this column, let me put on the pointer here so that you can see. 1 second. In this column here, you can see the base item damage on my gloves, my head, my shoulder, my main hand, my shields, and they all add up to 4,189. As you can see here, one of my shield is 399. It's an Inferno 2 shield, or offhand. And then you have a shield number 2, or offhand number 2, which is from Inferno 1 with 370. So just to illustrate the differences between different levels, and between some levels the difference are greater than others. So there's no clear pattern that I have found there. Anyways, what you do is that you take this total base item damage when you have unequipped all of your gems and your resonance is at 0. We have 4,189. Then you equip all your gems and you get your resonance. Then it's, in this case, 4,300 resonance. Then I use this formula to calculate the base damage that shows on my attribute screen. So I take the item base damage, I multiply it by 1 plus my resonance divided by 2,000. And then I add the total number of ranks socketed in my gloves, which is 2 rank 8 gems, that's 16. I multiply it by 512 and then by 3%. Then I add 940 from my tourmalines. I add 4,700 from my paragon damage. And then I add 300 from the Horadrim bonuses. And finally, I take my intelligence at 7,591 and I multiply it by 0.3. And if you remember, I also mentioned that there is a magical attribute that increases the base damage of an item. And I actually have a 3% base damage increase on this shield here with 399 item base damage. So I have to add 3% of 399, which is 12. And then we end up with 21,670, which is also the number that we saw at the beginning when we talked about base damage, when I took a print screen from my attribute screen. So I guess by doing these calculations and we do them together, it will make us understand even more about how everything works when it comes to damage. So now we really understand base damage. Now when we have our base damage, we're gonna go through our different damage modifier brackets as we discussed in this video. And if we look here in this column, it's the bracket 1, the normal damage modifiers. And you can see here that in total I have 30.5% primary attack damage. Those will also affect the damage of my summons, so therefore I have included it here. I have 65% increased summon damage. I have a total of 36% from my sets, and I also have the Reforged at 24%. So that's how I have juiced up this number a lot. I also have Essence Mastery at 20%. And here, this is not exact science, because each essence affects a different skill. So I try to figure out, okay, what's the average? So the real number that I should have put in here can be anywhere between 15 to 25%. I'm not exactly sure, but at least it's close enough to give us the picture of our total damage output. I also put in 15% from the damage increase that my 2-piece Shepherd set gives me. So let's not forget about that. I also have the Warband Attacker Room with 3.5% damage bonus. I have the Collar of Brutus Warband Remnant, which gives me 10% damage increase. I have the Typhorus Warband Remnant that gives me 6% damage increase. I have Coward's Rage that gives me 3% increased damage. If we look on my charm, like I showed earlier, the average bonus is actually a little bit higher than 2%, but I didn't want to exaggerate anything, so I just put in 2% here. I use the Weaver Paragon, which gives me 15% increased damage. I have the Awakened bonus effects on many of my essences, and on average it increases the damage with around 10%. So I don't have 10% on every skill, but on some skills I have more than 10%. So on average, this is not an exact science either, but I chose to put in the number 10% here. Lastly, I also put in Invocation because I can activate Invocation by doing damage to the target, but this can be different. There is also an invocation that activates when you summon something, but I have noticed that in many cases when you summon a new clone, for example, that's not when the fight starts, so often the damage bonus goes away before the fight. So I've been trying to mix it up with different types of invocation, but I feel like this damage, there's like 2.5% chance that it triggers whenever you make damage. Then you know that it will at least trigger while you are in a fight. And it's the same chance to trigger Seeping Bile, and as a Necromancer you do a lot of attacks, so I prefer this type actually, instead of the 25% to activate it when you summon a new summon, because it activates from a clone or anything. That's not perfect. So when we summarize this bracket, and we add all of these numbers up, we end up at 195%. So that's a lot, and I have been working really hard to optimize this. If we go to the next column, we have the second bracket, which is the legendary gem modifiers. And as you can see here, I use a rank 8 Blood-Soaked Jade, which gives me 20.5% damage increase. We have the Bottled Hope at 20.5%. I don't know if you remember, but as a Necromancer, this actually triggers twice if you manage to buff both yourself and the summons at the same time. But I'm not going to count it twice here. I'm just going to count it once. We also have the Pain Clasp at rank 10, which gives us 24%. We have Follower's Burden at 18%. And we have Bloody Reach, and here you can see I put 31%. And if you remember, a rank 10 Bloody Reach gives you 24% increased damage, but you can also put in gem resonance effects, and then you receive extra bonuses. And then I have included primary attack damage 3% and damage done per party member. It's 1% increase per party member. So that's another 7% in total. That's why it's 31% instead of 24%. Lastly, in this bracket, we also include the gem resonance effect from Mother's Lament. I have not fully upgraded the gem resonance in this gem, but I do get the primary attack damage and the skill damage effect. Since skill damage does not affect this build as much as some other bonuses, I chose to not include it in this bracket and only include the primary attack damage. And if we add up all of these numbers, we end up at 117%. Then we move on to the third bracket, which is buffs and debuffs. And yeah, it's fairly simple. If you remember, it's the strongest buff that counts and it's the strongest debuff that counts. And a good thing for Necro nowadays is that you can actually both buff yourself and put a debuff on the target. So with the new Bone Wall buff, I will buff the damage by 40%, and I will also put a debuff with the help of the Poison Golem at 10% on the enemy target. So if we add these two together, we are at 50%. So yeah, it's a lot. Lastly, we have the combat rating bracket. As I said, you can't really work a lot with this. It's fairly easy to cap it at 11.3%. So what you actually do is we already have our base damage, and then by implementing all of these brackets, we will make this number grow exponentially. So we take my base damage of 21,670, and then we multiply it by 1 plus 195%, or 1.95, and then we multiply it again, and we multiply it again, and we multiply it again with each bracket. So when we add bracket 1, we have already raised the attack by more than 2 times, almost 3 times. And then we add it again, and we add it again, and add it again, and at the end we will see that our actual normal hits will be 231,598 instead of 21,670. So we started at 21,670, and if we didn't manage to put anything into those brackets, that would be our actual damage as well. But thanks to these brackets, and that damage is exponential, you can increase this number a lot. And as you can see here, this actually only calculates the average, no, not the average, but it calculates the normal hits. Now we're gonna go even further and see how the critical hit damage and critical hit chance affects this number. So we already talked about how to improve critical hit damage and critical hit chance. And here you can see my numbers on my build. I have 82% critical hit chance and 208.5% critical hit damage. This means that 82% of the time I will hit 208.5% more than a normal hit. So by using this formula down here, you can see I take the normal hit number that I calculated on the previous page, and then I multiply it by 1 plus 0.82, that comes from this critical hit chance, multiplied by 2.085, which comes from this critical hit damage number. And this will give us the real actual average damage. So just to simplify, imagine that I hit something every second, and we started with no normal damage modifiers or legendary gem modifiers, so all the brackets, they were at 0. Then I would only have 3% critical hit chance and 100% critical hit damage, which are the base values as we can see here. That would mean that I would hit the target 21,670 each time, and 3% of the time I would hit double that amount. But by doing what we have done, we have basically, from our base damage number, went up 30 times. So this is how you tweak your build to juice out as much damage as possible. And just to illustrate the importance on the building your character directly, I'm actually going to do a comparison. So if you look here on the screen, you will actually see the comparison I talked about. At the top you can see my current build that I have highlighted in this video now when we have made the calculations, and this build had 4,300 resonance. Just to illustrate what I've been talking about, I chose to construct another imaginary build that looks exactly the same as my current build, but I just switched out the legendary gems. So instead of 4,300 resonance, I have 8,000 resonance. and I use a fully ranked Bloodsoaked Jade, a Bottled Hope, an Echoing Shade, Frozen Heart, Seeping Bile, Starfire Shard, Chip of Stone Flesh, and a Howler's Call. And as you can see here, if we start by looking at the base damage, you can see that, wow, the base damage is almost 50% higher on the 8000 Resonance build. So, as I said earlier, most people, they look on this number and they compare and think that, okay, I have to pump up my Resonance as much as possible. But now, when we have gained more knowledge, we actually understand that this base damage number doesn't mean a lot. What actually means a lot is the actual damage output. So when we have taken all the different damage modifiers into account, your critical hit damage and your critical hit chance, what will you hit then on average? That's what matters. And there you can see here that even though we have only changed the second bracket, the total damage average goes down a lot. So imagine what would happen if we started to take away stuff from the other brackets as well. Very fast, the total damage average would dwindle down. And I know that there's a lot of players playing this game around 8000 Resonance or 9000 Resonance even. They have not focused at all about how to build their character properly. So if I would put in their numbers and their build and run these calculations, their total damage average would actually be sometimes even 3 times lower than what my build has. So this shows that at first glance it might look like a very easy thing to do to improve your damage. You just improve your Resonance and that's gonna be it. But there's actually a lot of different tweaks and science behind the perfect build. And you don't have to upgrade your legendary gems to rank 10 in order to start outperforming these high Resonance players. If you would use the tips from this video and implement it on your build, there's a lot of things you can do by just grinding and finding new gear. For example, it's very easy to bump up your critical hit chance and your critical hit damage. Of course, what is easy is relative, but it's doable. If you start to focus on these things, over time, you will start to have a character that's more and more optimized. And as I told you, a lot of my items, they are from a previous difficulty level, which means that you don't have to have the latest item with the highest possible combat rating. You can actually have an item that's 200 paragons old that will still be very, very strong today. So over time, if you adapt to what I've tried to teach you in this video, hopefully you will see that you will gain more and more power really fast. And that is the main goal of this video. So of course, if you are a necromancer, you can look on my numbers here and try to copy, but this is the best type of build at this moment. In the future, maybe there are new updates, then it's very important to understand the logics, how are things calculated. And if you understand it, then you can adapt and come up with builds yourself. And you can do the math and you can see, okay, this will work, this will not work. This new gem, I should switch it out because it decreases the second bracket, which will on the last row give me this much more damage output. So I really hope that this video has given you this opportunity going forward. But before ending this, I will just mention some last factors that affects damage, because there's one factor that we really haven't talked about at all, and that's attack speed. Okay? Attack speed is extremely important. If you remember the calculations we just did, we managed to up our total damage average to over 600,000 from a base damage of 20,000. So imagine that you hit the target once every second. And now by increasing the damage we do every hit and the critical hit chance and the critical hit damage, we got this up to an average of over 600k. And that will give us 600k damage per second if we hit the target once every second, right? But if we can manage to hit the target faster, of course, we will still hit it as hard, but we will hit it more often. So if I manage to increase the attack speed by, let's say, 100%, I will hit double the amount of hits. So it will basically double the damage. You can actually get attack speed as a magical attribute on your items. The thing is though, I still recommend to go for critical hit chance and critical hit damage, because there are so many other ways to increase your attack speed. So you can, through essences and buffs from either yourself or your party, cap the attack speed. And then the magical attribute effect will not be important anymore. But critical hit chance and critical hit damage will almost always be important. It's important to note though that as a necromancer, the attack speed on your summons has no cap. So you can actually keep buffing the attack speed higher and higher. So the damage we have calculated so far, it's so low based, and it has not taken the attack speed into account. But if you start to do the calculations on a group level, and you start to count all of these attack speed buffs on your summons, the necromancer is a monster, okay? It's very, very strong. But of course, there are other strong classes as well, and with new patches, it will probably change. But the necromancer class has been very strong for quite some time when it comes to PvE damage. But let me just show a few ways to increase your attack speed. So first of all, you have your set pieces that some bonuses can increase the attack speed. As a necromancer, for example, I always use the 6-piece shepherd. And the 6-piece shepherd will add 60% attack speed to my summons for 12 seconds. And this is massive. As I told you before, most fights are over in even 6 seconds. So whenever I go into Gauntlet and I start the fight, bam, this will activate and my summons will have 40% damage increase until the boss is dead or the phase is over. So it's very, very strong. Attack speed affects your total damage output, while, for example, I know that some people, they like to play 4 pieces of Shepherd and then 2 pieces of Shalbas, which gives extra damage to primary attack, and that also scales with the summons. But this goes into the first bracket that we have discussed. So each percentage in the first bracket is not as useful as each percent in attack speed. The attack speed will have a lot greater impact on your damage output. So always go for attack speed over a damage modifier in any of the brackets if it's possible. As a necromancer, this is just an example. There are many builds in many classes that can buff attack speed in different ways. The good thing about this essence for necromancers is that it buffs all my allies, which includes the summons. As a necromancer, for example, if I improve my own attack speed, the only thing that it will do is that I can summon the summon faster, but the summon itself will not attack faster. But then we have the effects that it works with the summons, so those are the ones I'm showing here. But like I said, this essence is very strong. It's a new main hand for necromancers, and whenever one of your skeleton dies, you will buff your whole party with 38% attack speed. Also, I use the vexed cursed properties. So basically what it does is that once every 30 seconds, if you have 6 pieces, it's 30 seconds, it increases the attack speed of my summons by 24%. So it's quite strong. Every attack speed buff is very, very strong. There's a small problem with this one. It's actually activates when you summon the first minion. So when you summon the rest, they will not get this effect. So in many cases, only your skeletons and the first summon will get the effect. So that's not optimal. But in longer fights, then it works better, because then most of the time when you summon a summon, the other summons will already be alive, so then they will also get the buff. Here is a must-have for every group. It's, according to me, the best set in the game, and it's the Vithus Urge set. And if you have 4 pieces of it equipped, whenever you buff your party members, they will gain extra attack speed for 3 seconds, 30% extra attack speed. And if you are a support class, if you are, for example, a crusader or a monk, you need to have this set. It doesn't matter if it's bad rolls, you need to have this effect because it's so helpful. There are also some builds, some buff builds for wizards, where they increase the movement speed of the whole party when you run dungeons, and it will keep the Vithus Urge effect active at all the time. And there are also some buff builds with Barbarian and so on. So in my opinion, for most of the content, this is probably the strongest set there is. So if you are a crusader and you want to run dungeons, you have to use this set because it's so good for the whole party. And the good thing about this set is that it doesn't matter if you are super strong or if you're a little bit weaker, the effect will still be the same. So if you play support and you're a little bit weaker, you can still do such a great impact on the group. And that's nice for newer players who wants to feel that they are doing something that are beneficial for everyone else. So will have to highly recommend this one. Finally, this is just a few examples. There are many different essences that buffs attack speed, but another very, very strong essence is the Stirring Titan. It's a monk essence, and it makes the Inner Sanctuary buff increase the attack speed instead. And I can see that a lot of people, they tend to use the damage buff helmet, and that's also a very, very strong and good buff. But for me personally, I prefer this one because attack speed is very important. But also I'm a necromancer, so since there is no attack speed cap on my summons, I can actually utilize all of these at the same time, and the bosses will melt in milliseconds sometimes. So it's super fun when we do speedruns. So yeah, that's a few ways to increase the attack speed. You can't forget about that because it's just as important as critical hit chance. We also have to mention some other factors. We're not going to dive deep into those. We have cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction can be useful in longer fights, but in most cases it's not really that important. But it helps you to avoid some unwanted downtime of some skills in some types of content. Like if you play Gauntlet in some groups, it's important with cooldown reduction. You also have beneficial effect duration, and you can actually get this magical attribute on your feet, on your waist, on your chest, and on your legs. And this is the best magical attribute you can get on those items. And if there's only one magical attribute on the item, you can actually get 7.5% beneficial duration. This is from a new patch that came out a few months ago, so that's really strong because there's actually not any of the other magical attributes that I think are that interesting. And what this does, it actually prolongs the beneficial effects, like the effect from Mother's Lament, any types of beneficial effects. And that's of course very strong, because you want, when the effects are active, it increases your damage output a lot. But like I said, most of the times, at least for me, the fights are over quite fast, so the effect from beneficial effect duration in PvE is maybe not as good as it looks, but still it's important to think about it. So yeah, those are the 3 other factors I wanted to talk about. So let's wrap this up, and here are the key takeaways from this video. There's of course a lot we've been talking about, but I at least wanted to make a short summary. This doesn't include everything, of course, but here are some bullet points that you can think about going forward. So first of all, maximize each possible damage modifier bracket that we have talked about in this video with relevant effects that works with your build. That's step number 1 and takeaway number 1. Takeaway number 2 is that you should always use items with critical hit chance and critical hit damage above anything else, with priority on critical hit chance. So if you can't find something with both on it, equip something with critical hit chance. And if you find something with both critical hit chance and critical hit damage, congratulations, that's an item you can keep for a long time probably. I've said it many times already, but do not focus on resonance. This will not work at all when you want to maximize your damage. Follow the tips in this video and you will do wonders after some time. As I also said earlier, do not focus on combat rating. It's a common mistake that everybody does. Make sure that your combat rating is above the recommended level, and if you can, reach the cap damage bonus of 11.3%. But after that, you don't have to think about it at all. Only focus on the magical attributes when you loot a new item. That's the most important thing. Everything else is secondary. Yeah, we talked about attack speed, and since with my philosophy you don't increase your attack speed through magical attributes that much, you need to get them from other sources. So when you compose your parties and your build, you have to think about, okay, which essences can I use for attack speed? Is there any set that works with my build that increases attack speed? And if I go out to party with my friends, what kind of buffs can they bring to the table? And then you can go on from there. It's very important. And yeah, I've already mentioned this, but often I see people that try to maximize their combat rating, yes, but maybe they have items that look very good because they have some nice magical attributes on them. And when it comes to set pieces, it's actually very important that you have the correct set that corresponds with your build. It doesn't matter, like, I know that if we look on my set pieces, they are optimized. They have 10% summon damage, etc, etc. And yeah, it's top notch. But if I didn't have the correct set equipped, if I had these magical attributes on the wrong set, I would still not use them, because the set effects themselves are so strong, so I can't be without them. Like, I can't sacrifice the critical hit chance that I get from shepherds, I can't sacrifice the summon damage, and I can definitely not sacrifice the attack speed I get from the 6-piece bonus. And this goes for almost every build. You can't just randomly equip items. You have to really think about, okay, what is the optimal set? If you're not sure, you can go to if you want to try out your damage output, you can try 2 different sets and go to the training dummy and make some comparisons, but at least think before you choose. Like, don't just put a random item in, okay? Thank you. Yeah, I just want to finish with this and to say that be very careful when you salvage something. A lot of my friends, when I've been trying to explain to them how damage works, a lot of them tells me like, oh my god, I've been playing this now for over a year and I've been doing it so wrong. I don't even want to think about how much items I have destroyed that I shouldn't have destroyed. But it's better to get this knowledge a bit late rather than never. So if you just wait for a couple of months and you implement everything we talked about in this video, you will be happy. I promise you. So yeah, that's I know this was a very long video for you guys to watch, but I really wanted to make a thorough explanation of everything because I know that there are a lot of these guides that gets uploaded and they just go through everything so fast and they don't go deep enough for the viewer to really grasp and understand the logic behind everything. And that has always been the case for me personally, that I don't want someone to only tell me what to do. I also want to understand why I should do it, because then I can evolve and become better at whatever I want to do. And it's the same here with damage. That's why I'm such a nerd, because I just don't want to go online and see, okay, what builds are there for me to copy. I want to really understand it myself, because if I do that, I can start to theorize and start to come up with new ideas that I couldn't have otherwise. And that's also why I enjoyed these kinds of games a lot, because you can really get down into the details and you think that it will not have a great effect in the end, but actually it does in this game, and that's so funny. So before I leave you, I just want you to know that I'm very thankful for you to watch this video. And I'm also going to post in the description my Discord. If you want to chat with me, ask questions, you can do that. As I said, everything in this video is based on my own research. So if you have any tips or you want to add something and you disagree with something, feel free to comment. And yeah, let's just help each other to evolve and become better at this game. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, and see you guys later. Avrath elom no kuro, right?